Hello, I'm Professor Charles MacQuarrie from the English Department at California State University, Bakersfield, and this is my colleague.
Rachel Tatro-Duarte. I'm the doctoral student at CSU Bakersfield.
And as you see, we are going to be giving a paper titled A Qualitative Study of Virtual Reality as a Means of Providing Cultural Context in Literature Classrooms at Minority-Serving Institutions. Let me change to the next slide. There's the research question. Oh, by the way, we're in AltSpace. So we've been creating worlds and trying to use AltSpace as a means of teaching in VR. In any case, here's our research question. It is, does virtual reality improve critical thinking and literary analysis by providing deepened cultural contexts? And what this started in, it was a pilot study. And in the pilot study, we used a video game called The Price of Freedom, which dealt with the CIA experiments on using LSD in the 50s and 60s, and how they use it, at least in part, to try and train to train agents, essentially. And then we had a poem connected to it. It was a poem by a guy named Nassi Fesherarki, and it was called MK Ultra. And our idea is to focus on experiential learning, to have them play the game, to give them a certain amount of cultural context, and then to read the poem and to see if they have more of a purchase, more of an understanding of the poem. So one, we want to immerse them in an experience, and then two, we want to see if that immersion leads to an experiential kind of learning where it enhances their understanding. And we assess that largely by short answer questions and then by interviews. Rachel, do you have anything to add to that? Or
No, do you want to explain a little bit about experiential learning and what that looks like? The theory?
Should I pop the next slide up, or it's not going to be too useful in that? So in terms of what we're thinking in terms of experiential learning and experiential education, so we begin with the Thomas Dewey stuff, and it's essentially, as most of you will know, it's you learn by doing. It's kind of a hands-on approach. In terms of Kolb and experiential learning, though, what we're hoping to do is kind of level the playing field. So we know that at the more elite institutions, the students will have traveled. They will have traveled the world. And as part of that travel, as we know in experiential learning theory, they internalize, they build a matrix so that when they come across things in literature and film, etc., they have a context in order to understand it. And what we know with our students, many of them, we both teach in Kern County. Rachel teaches at Porterville College, and I teach at California State University, Bakersfield. Some of our students have never left Kern County. And it seems, I mean, it's one, deeply unfair, of course, but in order for our students to understand and get a purchase on the material, we need to provide some sort of experiential learning, and that's what we're hoping VR will allow us to do. And in our pilot study, it did show, I mean, it was effective. We did find in the pilot study that students really did get more of a purchase, more an investment, because of their experience in VR in the game Price of Freedom. Did I say enough about that, Rachel, or do you want to add to that?
I think that's pretty good. Also, what this work in progress, what's really going to be focusing on is the method that is being used is the grounded theory. So what came out of the pilot study was a VR experiential learning process model, which is something that started to emerge with in vivo coding. And so really what it does is it breaks down what does experiential learning actually look like in VR, and what's the process that students or those that are doing the experiential learning actually looks like. So that's what it kind of breaks down. It has the adaptability phase where you have to be adaptable to actually continue. If you can't adapt to the VR world or the experience that you're in, there's a chance that you won't move forward. So that has to be something that students go through. The other phase is the fragmented disarray phase, the period of confusion. You're not really sure what to make of it. In this case, with what we were using, Price of Freedom, they weren't really sure what the goal of the game was, so that's the disarray phase. And then the epiphany phase, where things start to come together. You start to realize, like, okay, this is what's happening, and that's what leads to the enhancement phase. The other thing that did come out was the immersive pyramid. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I want to say a couple things. I just want to add a couple of things to this. So really, and one way of looking at this schema is also what we're talking about is immersion is crucial to us. But what we really want to move to is kind of not the experiential learning. So they are immersed, and then this immersion leads to experiential learning, which they then apply to the literature. And I would say, Rachel ran the experiments and did the interviews here, so she does have, she has the real expertise here. But I'll put the next slide up so we can talk about the pyramid, because I think this was one of the most interesting discoveries that we made. Rachel, do you want to talk us through it then?
Yeah. So levels of immersion is something that we started to think about, and one thing that we started to figure out we could gauge that was pronouns. So third person is kind of is light immersion. Pronouns like he, she, they, it shows a light level of immersion, and then moving up is the second person level of immersion when they're saying or referring to you, and then finally is the first person. It's the ultimate level of immersion, and that's when it's the I experience.
Yeah. So we were thinking of titling them according to ancient Greek metrics as the first stage would be the antepenultimate, the second stage the penultimate, and then finally that when they start using I and they're completely identifying with the avatar and the character, that's where we get to the ultimate stage. And we track this in the pilot study, and then what we're hoping to do in this larger study that we're undertaking. So we got some internal funding, about $5,000 of internal funding to run this on a wider scale. And so we're going to test out these models that we created as part of the pilot study to see whether they stand up in the wider study.